Welcome back, everybody. Today we've got me and Pam here. We're going to be talking about unbalanced relationships. We've been talking about this topic a little bit here and there over the past couple weeks, and now today we're going to kind of address it a little bit more directly. Pam's got some experiences counseling lots and lots of women over the years. That's kind of your heartbeat of your ministry and what you do.
I would say it's been on my heart to talk about this because I've encountered it so much lately. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was just thinking like there are 4 or 5 people that I've been talking to a lot in the last 2 years going through some pretty serious stuff in their relationships that might even feel called out right now because they think they're the only one. But it is so common, especially in the church, that I felt like, man, we really should address this in a podcast to give some feedback for people who are maybe both before relationship, before they're gonna get engaged or get married, some signs that might indicate that there might be some issues before, and then also just to help people who might find themselves in a situation in their marriage where they didn't realize that it was so unbalanced.
Right.
And we avoided the term unequally yoked because that's really a believer and a non-believer. But in the scenario we're talking about today is really where specifically where a woman finds herself in a relationship with a man she thought was a Christian, or she thought he was as strong a Christian as she is,
right,
and realizes that they are really unbalanced in their walk with the Lord.
Yeah. So our goal is to kind of give hope to everyone who may be in this type of situation. There is hope, maybe some tools and some equipment, and just to know you're not alone. This is a common problem that I know you've seen a lot. I know other pastors on our staff have been, and counselors have seen this as a common thing. So you're not alone.
Yes.
There is hope.
Yes.
And we're just going to kind of share a little bit about that today.
Exactly.
So in this situation, you're seeing it's very common in the church where a woman's usually more strong in her faith. Husband maybe is not, maybe a little bit more controlling, domineering. What are some of the signs that you would see in a man who may, some kind of telltale signs that you might be able to notice and pick up?
Yeah, it seems like there's a trend where they seem very charming and accommodating at first. And later on, there's almost a little bit of hiddenness of his domineering side. And so whether it's a longer courtship or in the marriage, at some point, this trend I see is that a woman realizes like that he's really controlling and he's been taking advantage and he's pushing her, and then it kind of becomes more the norm than the exception in their relationship.
Got it.
So the signs are a little bit hard to see at first, but a lot of times he kind of pushes the relationship really fast, and a lot of times she might be more naive, and she might be kind of allow herself to be more passive and kind of be pushed and be controlled in that way, and she doesn't even realize it because of the courtship phase can be really fun and fabulous, and we joke about La La Land. We're kind of
for sure.
Yeah. So that's some of the things that I see in men at first. And there may be signs at first, and she, it's not like this is all on him, that she is equally complicit by ignoring things. So a lot of times
shoving things, not addressing them. Oh, it's not that big of a deal.
Exactly.
Just kind of putting it in the closet.
Yes. And for her part, it might seem like she's overlooking things, and it might feel like it's a noble thing to do. It's a righteous thing to do, to kind of like it's a Christian thing to do, to be loving and forgiving, and but then all of a sudden there's a point where she realizes like, oh, this is a pattern, and things are escalating. We're fighting more, that kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. So I know you'd mentioned like some other things to kind of take notice of is, does he have deep relationships, other people in his life that
That's good.
is connected deeply?
Yes, that's a good point. That tends to be absent in this characteristic trait in this unbalanced type relationship we're discussing, where he might have friends, but they're superficial friendships, or he might not have any friends at all. So you might realize like, oh, we never do anything with anybody else. It's just
Us two.
Yeah, he
kind of
wants
isolated.
to isolate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when he does have friends, he may say, oh, no, I'm accountable to my friends or my pastor. But then at a harder look, you realize like there's really not. And he really kind of is his own man and does what he said. And especially in things that he might be ashamed of or want to keep hidden.
Yep.
He doesn't. And he might get angry if she wants to bring someone else, like a counselor or a pastor or a friend or whatever, into this situation to help. He might get angry or frustrated, because I see this a lot when a couple gets to that point. And you mentioned counseling or accountability, where there's a lot of anger on his side because he's very insecure is another trait.
Yep.
And he's trying to hide that part. He's ashamed of it, but yet doesn't want to deal with it.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good to know. I think you also mentioned a lot of the times too, one or both people may come from a family where there is that type of parent. They saw that kind of pattern in their own household.
Yeah. So that might be something to consider if you're in this situation. You start reflecting on, how did I get here? It might have been in your family of origin. You might have been controlled and dominated. Like if the woman in this situation might find this example where before she even has memories, she was controlled and dominated as a toddler. And she was so used to this pattern of behavior that it feels familiar to her and it doesn't feel wrong. Even though there may be lots of memories, bad memories of going, oh, my parent did this or my parent did that. There is still part of it that is very familiar. And so it sets up a woman in that situation to be seduced by a type of guy that is more controlling and dominating, and she can find herself in some toxic patterns of behavior.
Yeah. And there's another term we've kind of used before. I guess it's more of like a trendy term where it's like love bombing. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that, but that's also potentially a pattern, I guess, is maybe of what you would call.
Tell me more about that. Explain that.
Yeah. Like, someone, like, it's kind of like a switch that kind of flips on and off. All of a sudden it's on and they're amazing and telling you how much they love you and giving you gifts and all this kind of stuff. And then you forget about all the stuff that you just went through, all the controlling and or the blow ups and that kind of stuff. And you forget it for a period of time, and the switch flips again. And now all that stuff comes back, and now you're in it again, in the problem, and the switch goes on, and now we're going to just throw all this love on you to make you forget about what just happened, so there's that kind of
That's great. I'm not familiar with the love bomb term, so I'm glad you said that, because young people will relate to that, and then you're going to know that characteristic set of traits, like, what are we talking about here? Because that is a beautiful example of that cycle that tends to happen for these couples, because things tend to escalate to where she'll might start to bring something up, but then, and he's a kind of a yes man and a promise maker. He promises the moon and doesn't follow through. And so in the moment it's, yes, sweetie, I'll take care of it. I see what you're saying. But then later on, it's just like the same pattern. Nothing's changing, right?
Right.
So there's no accountability. And so she continues to get irritated and bitter. And that ends up leading to more volatility, and that ends up leading to some explosive arguments, and then things are really bad. And that's the point usually where they're reaching out for help. Like, I can't do this. Yeah. Need help. And then it's all out. It's almost like festering, like a boil that comes to a head.
Yeah,
and
like
then
an
it's
infection that just gets worse and worse.
And then once it's lanced, it feels better. There's instant relief. And then they go back to the love cycle, the love part of the cycle where, oh, we're so grateful that's over. And we can go back to like our real relationship where we really love each other. And so things kind of get swept under the rug again and escalate again.
Yeah.
And what I see the woman do is, there's a lot of godly, principles kind of behind the thinking, and it can be very confusing, frankly, because you want to love, you want to forgive, you want to have hope, and then it starts to feel hopeless, and you start to feel unforgiving and bitter and angry and frustrated, and then you go back to, okay, the relief part, and now, okay, yes, so I need to be loving and kind and forgiving, and then the husband starts to take advantage of that graciousness again. And so if there isn't a point where the couple gets real help with the root causes, then the cycle will continue. And now also the cycle, because a lot of times the cycle will continue even though it's getting better. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is look to see if there's any progress. Is there progress? Because sometimes when you're hurting and both people are in a lot of pain, it's hard to see that progress. And then if you take a step back and look, you go, no, okay, honestly, we are doing this better. We're talking, so.
Yeah. So it kind of seems like the two characteristics, kind of like the two things that create this kind of common relationship is a woman who's maybe more passive, doesn't really have any real boundaries or know what that looks like. And then a man who doesn't really who's maybe has some insecurities and then no accountability kind of in his life. And then these two people together create this controlling and this really passive toxicity that happens kind of in this relationship. And I know we've talked too of like, sometimes the roles can be reversed. You can have a very insecure, controlling woman, and then a guy who's more passive, doesn't know boundaries, which we'll probably do another video to address that because we see that commonly as well, where the roles are reversed. But that's kind of the two. Yes.
And it's a good point that you make, because this is not exclusively about controlling men. It's in this scenario, it's kind of addressing both their tendencies and their propensity for whatever sin is in their life. But the reverse is also true. And that's really for another talk, because it's going to look a little different in the gender roles. But yeah, I think that will warrant a different podcast. But yeah, I think that it's just something that I see a lot of, probably because I am female and I get a lot of women who are coming to me in this specific scenario, and they find themselves in the situation where they don't know how they got into this situation. And so I thought, well, how would I try to like warn people who might be dating to look for signs, and then also help people who kind of get that wake-up call in marriage and go, okay, now what do I do? Yeah.
I'm here. Now what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a really heavy topic, and it's hard to hear. And I think probably everybody watching this can relate in some way, because they probably know someone, or maybe they are the person in the relationship. And it's heavy because it feels hopeless sometimes. Yeah. And it's really not hopeless, but it requires work.
Yeah, because in that situation, there's two people involved in the relationship. You have someone who's passive, needs to learn how to have boundaries, and there's probably some hurt and insecurity there. And you have another person who's also hurt and insecure and needs accountability. And, so you have two hurt people at the root of it that need help, counseling, the Lord, to help fix each of those issues so the way they can come together and both be healthy and whole together.
Yes.
So we talked a lot about boundaries. Can you define what a boundary is? Danny Silk has a really good definition, but I think people associate boundaries with disconnection and like, you're toxic, so I got to put a boundary around you. You're not allowed to talk to me. That's a boundary. You're not allowed to talk to me right now. That's about, very
That's
much disconnection. So can you kind of define what we mean when we say boundaries?
That's a good point, because in our culture, cancel culture is big, and it's easy to like, I'm going to block you. I'm like, we're going to block your number. I'm going to block you on social media. Like, that's not the boundary we're talking about. That's more of an unhealthy pattern or reaction to a situation. If you find yourself doing that a lot, then you probably need to look at you and realize what is a more healthy way to put up some boundaries. And so that looks like putting up a boundary of what works for you. A lot of times using that phrase can be good, like, oh, that doesn't work for me. Or can even invite someone into a conversation. Can we talk about that? Because I don't really like that. And I'd like to have a talk with you, but I'm scared you're going to get mad and blow up. Is that something that you can talk to me about? And maybe there's anger and outbursts. And so then maybe it'd be appropriate to say, okay, you seem angry right now. I get it. It's an emotional conversation to have. But let's pick a time when we can address it.
Yeah. So that's like a good boundary. I'm willing to have this conversation if we can both be calm and not super emotional and screaming. That's a boundary. And Danny Silk's definition for a boundary, I think he said, a boundary is to keep good things in, not keep people out. So, that boundary right there is a good example of,
yes,
I want to keep the connection. I do want to talk about this, and I can't stand here and let you just scream at me. So I do want to talk. I do want to connect, and I'm just not going to let you come here and just beat me up.
Yes, exactly.
It's a good example of a boundary.
Yes, it's good because it does keep out things that are harmful. And I don't know if it's Danny Silk or not, but Heather uses the analogy of the junkyard. If it doesn't have a fence, like anyone can come in and take anything. And so you can get taken advantage of, but you can also be abused.
Right.
So it works both ways. So yeah, that's a really good way of saying it. So yeah, the problem I see a lot of times with boundaries is that it's kind of, if you didn't grow up with this, it's like
It's
for
foreign
me,
concepts. Yeah, they don't teach this in school.
yeah,
How are you going to learn?
If your parents weren't just like exemplifying this, then it's like learning another language. It could take years for you to get fluent in this behavior and language. And so it did me. So one of the things I struggled with was like, okay, I read the books back then, and Townsend and the Boundaries books before Danny Silk, and then I read the Danny Silk books. It took that was probably a decade. So I remember at first going, okay, I get conceptually now what a boundary is. But the second phase of the hard work for me, and I see in a lot of people, is
doing it.
Yeah, holding the boundary. What does it look like to not just say, okay, I said the boundary and now it's not working?
Now what do I do?
Yeah. So holding the boundary is so important because people test the boundaries. And so what a lot of times in this scenario, controlling husband, it may be his temperament to be more analytical or attention to detail and to the negative thing. And so learning his temperament may be important, and it's just kind of maybe been without rails. It's been without. So appealing to the part of your spouse that you love is good, because all of us have that tendency to, our strength can be our weakness, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that controlling type of behavior can be very good, especially in your work, and seeing things that
take charge attitude. I'm going to get things done.
Yeah.
That's like when it's operating in a healthy way.
Yes.
But when you're not doing good internally or spiritually, that's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
It gets flipped.
Yes. So it becomes real important for the woman to do her work. The hard work for the woman is a lot of FaceTime I call it FaceTime, on your face, on the floor with Jesus, because it's not going to come in your flesh. This is something that requires the Holy Spirit to move in and through you. And it's because you have to discern when is the right time to love and forgive, and when is the right time to hold the boundary. Holding a boundary is not mean, but it can feel mean if you haven't practiced this
right,
before.
because you're now changing a whole pattern in a cycle. Now it feels all foreign and maybe not right because you're so used to something.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, for example, with your scenario of the yelling, holding a boundary would look like that yelling starts again after we've addressed it before, maybe many times. And you say, hey, that's not going to work for me. I'm going to go in the other room until you can calm down. Or, hey, I can see you're really upset right now. I love you, and I want to have this conversation, but just let me know when you're ready, because right now you don't seem ready. It's just coming up with some terminology, maybe even writing it down, some phrases.
Some
when you get upset and nervous, you forget sometimes, and you can react and explode back. So it takes practice. It's just like learning to ride a bike. It's just going to take practice to use these tools.
Yeah.
And you get a new set of tools, but you have to open the toolbox and reach in and get the right one and figure out which is the right one. It feels clumsy sometimes.
Yeah. And I think for the other person too, they're also learning this new pattern. So you're establishing boundaries. May take a while for them to catch on, like, oh, you're right, I was yelling. I didn't even notice I was doing that.
Exactly.
And so it's hard to, you're now introducing something totally foreign to the relationship, and it takes both people to remember to pick up, no, this is how we're going to do this now, because it's so way easier just to fall back into the old patterns.
Yes, exactly. So I feel like at this point, it would be important to kind of give a little disclaimer that things can get worse at this point, especially for a woman. And it is very important to to let everybody know that if you feel like your life is in danger, you need to take the appropriate steps.
Right.
Because there are cases, more extreme ones, where the husband reacts so badly to having boundaries introduced into a relationship that he can become so angry that the wife feels afraid.
Yeah.
And that is the appropriate time for a separation. The Bible talks about it clearly. And so I just want to address that before we move on, because it's easy to talk about the majority, but there is a significant number of people that feel afraid for their life.
Yeah. That they're physically in danger.
Yeah. And don't know what he's capable of next. And he doesn't either, because he's never been in a situation a lot of times where someone has held boundaries this long.
Yeah.
Or over and over. Because in the superficial relationships that he has, he leaves them.
Yeah,
and
it's easy just to disconnect and just run away.
Yeah, he blocked that person, or he quit that job, or and now all of a sudden he's in a marriage.
You don't quit that. You can't quit that easy.
Yeah, and so when a wife, there's a handful of cases where I've even personally been in a situation where I've been worried for the person. So I would say that before you get to that point, if you're starting to feel that way, don't deny those feelings. Don't discount them. Talk to someone, get some wise counsel, and it's appropriate to have separation sometimes so people can heal. So both people have a chance to heal, but because let's face it, you're ripping open wounds.
Yep.
And you're bumping up against each other every day, all day. Like, it's like rubbing salt in the wound every time I see you. So it is okay. And I wish more people would take advantage of this. And I know it's unheard of for the church to like advocate for it, but it's in the word.
Yeah.
Like,
we're not saying you get divorced, but just like,
exactly.
Let's not live in the same place for a period of time and both seek counseling and help so we can come back together. That's different.
Exactly.
Then we're done.
Yes, exactly. It's with the intention to heal and with the intention to love, forgive, to cherish the other, and to come back together, to watch the Holy Spirit move in miraculous ways, and to trust the Lord in that, because the Lord's going to be faithful and honor those sacrifices. So also I've seen it work out where couples just have a bedroom separation for a season, and that works too for some people. But nonetheless, I wanted to just give that little caveat, because it can be pretty frightening for people. But most of the time, I think people will start to respond to good boundaries in a healthy way.
Yeah, they start to learn.
Because I really believe that a lot of times that there's a deep desire to do better, for both people.
Yeah.
They both want something better. It's foreign.
They just don't know how.
Yeah. And it can seem like, oh, we've tried that. Because it's
It doesn't work. It's a lot of hopelessness.
Yeah, but a lot of water under that bridge, a lot of pain, a lot of trying, a lot of attempts to do. And so I get it. Be very careful. That would be a warning that if you see yourself, I'm saying I've tried that, or we've tried that, or we've been here before. If you feel cynical, that's a sign that you probably need to work through some forgiveness and some hopelessness on your own part, because it has nothing to do with the other person. That's your work. If you feel overwhelmed to the point where you don't want to try anything, then that's a good sign that you need to start by looking at your heart. Have you gotten a hard heart?
Yeah.
And ask the Lord to help you with that first. And then when you have a tender heart and you can stand in the Spirit, not your flesh, then there's this strength that comes that's exhilarating. You have this breakthrough, because you can't. This is one way I describe it. It's like once you get that breakthrough and you realize that, okay, the Lord is in this. He's guiding me. Like I've got these tools. I'm setting boundaries. So I know that I can't go back. I'm not going backwards. There was a time in my life when I got to this point where I realized that the Lord, I was scared to move forward in a relationship and let that person back in. And I've had this with girlfriends. I've had this with family members. I've had several different scenarios. But I remember specifically feeling afraid to let that person back in. I asked the Lord, are you wanting me to let that person back in? And the Lord said, you can trust me. And so I said yes to this person, giving them access to my life again. And the Lord gave me this amazing revelation where I realized that I was different, because I took a break from the relationship, and I got time to heal, and I got time to realize the toxic parts of that relationship that weren't working for me.
Yeah.
And so when I allowed that person back in, I've had this happen a couple of times. One time specifically, and the one I'm talking about, where it was huge for our relationship. And I was like, we're not going back. And so I could just look at the person like, oh, well, here we go again. Let's not do that. We're not
going
doing
backwards.
this. Yeah, we're not going backwards. And we were both in a good enough place that we could do that together. And then I've had relationships with one specific girlfriend where she couldn't handle the relationship anymore.
Yeah.
So she left the relationship and decided that
we're not friends
my
anymore.
new boundaries weren't working for her.
Yeah. So it's easier just to not be friends at all.
Yeah. And then yeah, it was,
that can
it
happen.
was a little painful. And, but at the time I was kind of like, you know what? I'm at that point where I'm better not having the relationship than trying to fix this one because the person was unwilling to. But I digress. I just wanted to kind of throw out there that there are different scenarios that these things can come up. We find ourselves in controlling relationships with different people. We call it a Jezebel spirit.
Right.
Don't want to get too much into what that means, but a lot of times that's what we're dealing with. We're talking about
manipulation and some more control.
Yeah. And it kind of sounds ominous and whatever, but I have seen people get free of it. It's not as common because the person has to want accountability and the person has to want to work through it. And like we said before, deep down, I think that people do.
Yeah, I don't think anybody ever gets into a relationship thinking, I want to hurt this person so bad.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, unless you're like an actual like psychopath, I don't think most people are getting in a relationship or even currently in one where you're consciously, I want to hurt you.
Yeah.
It's hurt inside each of the two people that is causing the hurt on each other, but it's not a conscious act of I want to hurt you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so just knowing that, believing the best about your partner, understanding who they are, their identity. We talk a lot about that at Shiloh. Knowing yourself, who am I? Knowing your partner, who are they? Meaning not how I see them, but how does heaven see them?
Yeah, the higher perspective.
Yes. So calling out their treasure. You're way too awesome to be acting like this. I love you, and we're gonna do better. We're gonna figure this out together. We're a team. Let's just take a break and come back in a few minutes. Maybe I need a timeout. I've said that and times with my husband, like, I need a timeout right now.
Yeah, we need to take a break before I say something I don't need to say.
I need to be with Jesus because I'm not feeling Jesus right now. So it's okay to be honest and to use humor. That's helped a lot too. It just like kind of cracking a joke can break the tension, but just being honest with yourself. It's not always easy, but to continue to come back to what work am I doing? Because I can only change me, can't change the other person.
Yeah.
And so I can change the scenario. If this feels abusive or if it's toxic, I can say, okay, hey, I'm gonna go read. I needed some time alone because this has gotten a little too intense for me. So there are lots of ways that you can continue to hold that boundary. And it's kind of fun to see the progress when you start to actually hold the boundary before you get mad, before you get to the point where you're reacting and you kind of see the tension start and you go, okay, I think it might be time for me to go for a jog. I need to get out of the house, kind of clear my head. You might not even, bring the other person into it. Just take a break, change the subject. Sometimes it's just changing the subject that helps kind of break the tension in the cycle.
So it seems like in this scenario for the woman, it's important to learn those boundaries, spend time with the Lord, invite him into the relationship, ask for wisdom and counsel. And then I guess there's an aspect, what should you be encouraging the other person to do? Obviously, you can't control him in the relationship at all. You can only just pray and encourage. What are things that you would encourage him to be doing or have her bring up, hey, here's a good,
Yes, I think that's a good question. Yes, to the point you can't change the other person or control the other person, but you can ask them to do something to change the cycle. There's a pattern that I see, and I need you to work on that. What are you going to do about that? So asking that question and coming and having some feedback if they're willing to take it. And so one of the things, I tell women this a lot, I've seen a lot of women go through divorce after dealing with this. Unfortunately, the marriages that I see successful are the men who are willing to get accountability from men in leadership in the church. Godly
accountability, yeah.
So the men who run from it, there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they end up leaving their spouse, and we've all seen that situation. Now you got a single mom raising kids, and she couldn't make him get accountability.
Yeah,
so I've seen that happen, but I've also seen a lot of breakthrough and some incredible testimonies of men who were really at their lowest point in their life, and then just really had, through an experience like this with having boundaries set and accountability, had a greater revelation of the Lord Jesus that they ever had. They didn't know, they never surrendered, that they had accepted Jesus, that they knew Jesus was Lord.
Right.
But they didn't realize like how little of their life they'd actually surrendered and yielded to the Lord. And so a lot of times that starts to look like yielding to your spouse. So a domineering, controlling husband might start to just let her have one every now and then. Like, okay, we'll do it your way. And that's yielding, surrender, however, just like, okay. And one of the healthy ways I see that manifest is when he can say, hey, I disagree with you. That doesn't sound like the right financial decision or whatever.
Right.
But I'm going to support you. And if it doesn't work, I'll help you clean up the mess. To me, that's a milestone to work toward, is like in both sides. If we can get to the point where we say to each other, hey, I really disagree. And I know we've talked about this and argued about this and gone round and round, but I'm just at the point where I don't want to be an adversary to you. It's important to you. Let's do it your way. And I'm not going to say told you so if it doesn't work out. I'm going to help you clean it up if it doesn't work out. It'll be fine. We'll get through this together.
Yeah. So it sounds like encouraging him to seek other men, godly men who are going to help. Because I think when we're talking about unbalanced relationships, specifically this scenario, usually the woman is very in tune with the Holy Spirit, probably a deeper relationship with Jesus than the guy. As a Christian, he believes in Jesus, but maybe he doesn't have that depth of relationship. So encouraging someone outside of you, helping develop that in them.
Yes.
I think is very important, especially for another man.
Oh,
Because you're a woman, you experience emotions, and your relationship with Jesus is different than what his would be.
Yes, because men need men for strong correction. And a lot of times these men have been either fatherless or had abusive father, or some scenario in between, but varying degrees. So a lot of times they can resist that because it's scary, because they didn't know a father, or they knew one that
bad one.
Yeah, that was hurtful. So it can be scary to trust, but having access, the wife can. A lot of times women are more in tune spiritually to the relational parts and the emotional parts of things. And so if she could help find those people and those resources, you can't make them go, but you can make suggestions. So maybe it's a pastor or a paid counselor or a friend that that is really wise, that can be neutral and help walk through that. So yes, and continuing to bring that up as an option and just say, hey, I think it's really important for us to both have accountability, and I'm doing this, and what are you doing about that?
Yeah, that's an important piece. I think it's easy for a relationship to go, you're the problem, so you need to go get fixed. And I wouldn't respond to that very well. If it's like, okay, it's only my problem that I have to, there's two people to play, so if you also take responsibility for your stuff, this is what I'm doing to fix me and my stuff, and I'm seeking, accountability and outside counsel. I think it'd be a good idea for you to do the same, kind of leading by example.
Good. Yeah, and if you start, that's a good point. I've had people well, he won't go to counseling. Well, then you start going.
Yep.
So I've had several times where the wife started going and then he started coming, because it's not, like you said, it's not to point the finger. It's I'm working on me and being willing to look at your own issues and see how you're contributing to this cycle. I remember one counselor and a wife told a wife in a scenario like this, she would come in and complain about all the controlling things he was doing. And he goes, well, it's your fault. And she would be like, what?
What are you talking about?
What? And really what he was getting her to the point of realizing is that you're not setting boundaries. You're letting him run amok. Stuff. And so why would he stop? He doesn't, you haven't
said, hey, I don't like that.
Yeah. Sometimes it's that simple. Like just sometimes the wife hasn't even just said it. She's expecting him to read her mind.
And figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, how would you not know?
Yeah.
And there's several times with guys, I'm like, why, you didn't know this? You didn't recognize this? They're like, no, totally oblivious. They're totally like oblivious. In a different world. Like, no idea.
Yeah. So they can't read your minds. Wife has to speak up. And the wife might have to speak up again and again and again. And that comes through, again, having that strength from the Lord, because it's not going to come from your flesh. It's going to, I call it being the brick wall. Once you set a boundary, you have to be the brick wall. You might say the exact same phrase over and over again, or whatever it looks like in that scenario for you, but it requires the strength to stand your ground. And that may require counseling and help from a pastor or friend or whatever too on your part. And so once a husband starts to see that the wife is safe, if she's the one leading by example, then that feels like a safer place for him to delve into also.
Yep. So
what an ideal situation is if one of them is going to get accountability and counseling without the other, that they start to show that breakthrough and they start to be more loving and more kind and more forgiving because they're holding the boundary. It's really interesting how that works. Like, you actually are less in your flesh when you're holding the boundary.
Right.
Because you're not afraid all the time and you're not in pain all the time. You're not overreacting all the time.
You can actually make a good conscious decisions in wisdom and in peace versus reacting.
Yes. And the other person usually responds well to that because they're like, oh, I'm not getting the same chaotic
reaction.
Yeah. So, oh, this is different. And then they come a little closer and figure this out. So as one of the people in the relationship starts to move in that direction, specifically I'm talking about women because a lot of times that's what I see, is that the woman is walking with the Lord, doesn't know what's going on with her husband. He's a Christian, but doesn't seem to want to grow. Or surrender. Right. And so a lot of times it comes to that, and a wife has to just go, okay, I'm going to get counseling, work on me. I'm going to get accountability, work on me. Then the husband starts feeling invited into that process, and it feels safer for him.
Yeah.
Especially if he's an insecure guy.
Yeah.
That's going to make him feel more secure. And she's going to really, at the end of the day, he's going to respect that more in her when he sees that strength.
Yeah. Definitely.
Because when we lose it and we're screaming, we're like, I can't believe you're doing this again. It just can be off-putting to the sense, in a sense that it validates his thinking.
Right.
Right. So
it feeds into the fear and the lie that's already existing.
Yes. So if we can maintain some composure and start to deal with things sooner than later. Like, I had this friend that was in a situation and her husband kept backsliding, and they were in a cycle, and she packed a suitcase. He came home and she threw the suitcase at him and pushed him out the door. So we would joke with each other, let's not get to the point where you're throwing suitcases and pushing someone out the door.
Yeah.
Let's
figure it out way before we get to that point.
Yeah. And so we joke about it. Of course, at the time it was serious and she was upset and hurting, and, but it is a good reminder, okay, we don't want to get to that point. We're all capable of it, but we just have to make sure that we're protecting our own heart so that we can be more loving. And it sometimes feels counterintuitive as you're learning to use these tools.
Definitely. Yeah, because I think sometimes a lot of it is fear and anxiety and insecurity coming up, and the tendency is to pacify it. You're feeling bad and scared, and I just want to make it better. And I recognize this too in certain relationships. If you pacify that insecurity, you're not allowing the Lord to expose that and for them to deal with it. You're kind of almost robbing them of an opportunity to deal with it because you're just pacifying it and making it go away. That's not good for them either. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the other person either.
True.
Because the Lord's trying to expose something. Something's getting brought to the surface, and so just pacifying it and making it go away, making it stop, is not going to benefit anyone.
Exactly. So sometimes being brave enough to call something out gently and kindly in love.
If it feels mean, you can do it in a nice way.
Control, with self-control.
Yes.
All the fruit of the Spirit should be involved. Because, it's hard to hear things about yourself and truth about yourself. And so doing it in a kind way, in a gentle way, is what any of us would want. And it's really the golden rule. I mean, how would you want to be loved?
Yeah. If I'm doing something crazy and hurting you and I don't know, I would want you to say, Megan, you're acting like a jerk. I need you to stop. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. I didn't mean to do that. I would very much appreciate that.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I love that term, brave communication, for that reason, because it takes strength and courage to address issues and not pacify them, like you were saying, like just gloss over it, or, I'm not going to say anything. That's different than, the Bible talks about overlooking transgressions. Well, how do you know when to overlook a transgression, and how do you know when to call one out? Well, it takes FaceTime, and it takes time to develop a relationship with the Holy Spirit to where you can hear quickly and respond quickly. It's discernment of knowing when to overlook something and when to say, hey, this is a pattern that I'm seeing. Can we talk about it?
Yep.
So, it's... it can feel a little overwhelming and tangled. A friend of mine used to use that as an analogy. Their relationship felt like a big hair tangle. It's like, I feel like I pull one hair out and it's connected to other. It can feel like that.
Yeah.
But all of these things, the tools that we're using, relying on the Holy Spirit, all the things that you find yourself engaging in, the Lord's going to bless those things. And you can choose to look at the tangle, or you can choose to look at what the Holy Spirit's doing.
Yeah, because it's a process. It's not an overnight fix a lot of the times.
Exactly. And the enemy wants you to look at how bad it is, how bad it still is. But the Holy Spirit is going to show you the progress that's been made, and he's going to show you the obstacles you've overcome, and he's going to show you where you're persevering. He's going to show you how you've been more forgiving and more loving and more kind. And there's such joy that comes from that place, and just that exhilaration of going, I can switch to that place. Like, I can sit here and look at how bad it is, or I can sit here and look at how great our God is and how amazing and then you operate in that joy instead of that anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's that quick. And we used to listen to a preacher way back on cassette tapes that used to say, there's nothing 10 seconds with Jesus can't cure. And wow, what a profound statement. Like, okay, I just need 10 seconds with Jesus to get it right. Like, it doesn't take an hour. Like you might choose to spend an hour because you feel so worked up. You might feel like, okay, I'm going to need some time to be with the Lord and calm down. But really, if you just turn your spirit towards him, he'll talk to you in the moment. It can be that quick, 10 seconds. That's all it takes.
Yeah. So I guess kind of wrapping up, it's for the woman's perspective, spending time with Jesus, obviously the number one thing, doing that FaceTime with him on your face, learning to set boundaries, healthy boundaries that are still connected, but also keep the good things in. Seeking outside wisdom and counsel and help, which I think is good for both people, and leading by example on that front, are all good things. And I know in your ministry experience, you've probably seen lots of testimonies. There's lots of hope for people in these situations.
Yes. And I'll just touch on a couple of years ago, we had some friends that went through some really awful things in the marriage. The husband was in addiction, and when the wife found out, she was devastated, and it seemed like the worst of the worst scenario. And there was like sexual perversion, all kinds of things. And so anyway, this couple became so close to the Lord that their whole lives were turned around and given to ministry. And now for decades, I've watched them help so many other people in situations like that. And there was another one where the wife was so ashamed of like her husband and the man he had become, like she didn't even want to talk about the problems. And then now, they're just leading ministry and doing marriage stuff and blessing people. And there's so many testimonies that would bring hope to people that I feel like people should really look for another couple like that, that could help walk them through. And it's like, hey, we've been there. We understand what you're going through, and there's hope.
Yeah. I would even say you could probably go on YouTube and find miraculous testimonies all over the internet. And I would also suggest that too for anyone in this situation. Fill yourself up with testimonies and truth.
So true.
Find that hope, especially if you're not feeling hopeless. Go hold on to someone else's testimony for hope. Because I've heard of a lot of crazy situations in marriages and relationships that you're like, oh, I didn't know. I wouldn't know if I could ever overcome that. And you're looking at an example of a couple that did. So I think that's really
important. A really good point. Yeah. So if you don't know someone, go find one online and seek help and wise counsel, because I promise you there's a pastor or a counselor that knows someone that can be a mentor and help guide you. And there are a lot of side ministries out there from counselors who do that. They'll hand off people that have been through, they set up mentor programs.
Yep.
Was there someone who's been through it that they can, you might see the counselor periodically, but you become lifelong friends with the mentor.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we have counseling here at Shiloh and Inner Healing Prayer, which is a big deal that if you're interested in, you can go to our website and sign up, because we love this kind of stuff. We love seeing breakthrough, helping people discover their identity, learning and growing and running with the Lord.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So Heather Brummer is our counselor on staff, and she'd be glad to meet with an individual or a couple. And then also Heather can point you to Inner Healing Prayer if that's something you're interested in. That's a good point.
Yeah,
thanks,
I love it.
Megan.
Yeah,
this was great. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks for watching the podcast. We all want to know and become the love of God in the earth. To connect with us, go to shilohcentral.org.